When a teenager from Santa Barbara applied for work as an artist at the Disney Studios, the company rep told the kid to get more art training. That the teenager immediately did, and 2.5 years later, Walt Disney Productions hired 20-year-old Floyd Norman as an apprentice in-betweener. Floyd worked in the Disney animation department for 8 years, moving from shorts, commercials, and interstitials to the big leagues of feature production and work with the 9 Old Men. In the early 60s, story legend Bill Peet walked off the Jungle Book. Walt Disney retooled the feature from the ground up, and Norman got a phone call to move to the second floor of the animation building and start work as a story man. I saw myself as an animator, says Floyd, but my gag drawings had been circulating around and somebody higher up must have liked them. So Mr. Norman became a story artist and worked on the Jungle Book for well over a year. When the picture wrapped, he launched his own company but returned to the House of Mouse 5 years later. He readily concedes that he has a fondness for Disney animation, although Floyd has worked at most of the iconic studios, including Hanna-Barbera, Pixar, and Disney Television Animation, as well as the main studio. And he's done almost everything, from writing to layout to animation. We talked in the conference room on December 22nd, 2011.
You started in the industry a few years ago, and you arrived at Disney in the middle of the Eisenhower administration. And describe to me your first day at Walt's place on Buena Vista.
You mean my first time ever?
Well, the first time you went onto the studio, and then the first day that you were there as an employee. How about those two things?
Well, first
they
time
were probably different.
First
right?
time was a high school kid. I went to the studio just to show my portfolio. As a kid just out of high school, wanting a job.
So that must have been what, 53, 54?
53, yeah. A naive kid with a portfolio. I managed to get inside, talk to a guy in personnel whose name was Ken Sealing.
Oh yeah, he was there forever.
Yeah, he was, and he looked at my portfolio and, nice sketches and all of that kind of thing, very complimentary, and said, "Kid, you need to go to school though." and he was correct. I needed to go to school, learn how to draw, and so. That's why I chose to go to Art Center, which at the time was located in Los Angeles.
Later it was in Pasadena.
Yeah, moved to Pasadena eventually.
But when you went to it was Los Angeles.
Right.
And then, so you jumped down because you were born and raised in Santa Barbara.
In correct? Santa Barbara, California.
And then, so you started Art Center, and that was probably right out of high school, right?
Right out of high school, yeah.
And you were there for the whole curriculum, or did
Oh, no, it was a 4-year course. I was only there about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And that's because I received a call from the Walt Disney Studios.
Now, how did they know of you? I mean, they're not...
Well, they knew of me because of that first visit, this dumb high school kid who came down from Santa Barbara.
But the portfolio interested them enough that they called you back later and said, how are you doing?
They kept my name on file. Surprise, surprise. I couldn't believe it. They kept my name on file.
Yeah.
So years later, they still had my name and phone number, and they gave me a call. And I was in Santa Barbara. I was back in Santa Barbara at the time. It was a weekend. And,
right.
I would drive home on weekends.
Was it old Ken calling you up saying, hey, how's it going?
I think it wasn't Ken. I think it was a guy named Bob Millard.
Oh, okay.
Who was, I think, Ken's assistant or Ken's or one of the guys in the personnel department. Yeah, that was back before HR. Back when we had personnel.
Right. And so they call you up and they say, what do they say to you?
They said, "Kid, are you still interested in that job that you had applied for some years earlier?"
Because you applied for a specific job then, right?
Well, I just applied for any job just to get into Disney. And back in those days, they had these training programs where they'd bring in about 12 kids. They'd put you in a room, and you would do in-betweens for about a month. And then they would keep the ones they liked,
Yeah.
If they felt you could do a decent
They kept a similar system off and on for years. I know they were running something like that in the 30s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And all that. So it hadn't changed.
No, not much. And it was such an obscure little business back in those days. I mean, nobody thought about going into animation. I mean, you had to be almost kind of a weirdo.
And Disney was really just a small mom and pop place in those days.
It wasn't
hanging
that big
on by
of a
a
deal.
thread.
Yeah, that's right.
It wasn't the mega corporation that it became known as.
No, it was a little family company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get the call from Mr. Mallard.
Yes.
And
he said, "Can you be here Monday morning?"
So that was the end of your art center studies.
Exactly. I became an immediate dropout and reported to work at the Walt Disney Studio that next Monday morning at 8 o'clock.
And what was your first gig at the Walt Disney Studio? Because that would have been early 1956, correct?
1956. Basically training. This kind of an old guy with a cigar named Johnny Bond.
Right.
He ushered all of us into a room, into the bullpen, and set us down at our drawing boards, and we all received these two extremes, and you had to do an in between the two extremes, putting a drawing in between two other drawings.
Were you intimidated by that? Or did you say, I can do this?
It was wild and crazy because we had never done anything like that before.
There was no prep? There was no pre-instructions? It was
Not really, because where could you go to learn about animation in those days? No schools taught animation. Certainly nobody taught Disney animation or how the process even worked.
Yeah.
It was one of those things, if you had drawing ability, if you could, if you were a cartoonist or you liked to draw, and you thought maybe I could do this animation thing. But a lot of us had no idea we would be doing this crazy drawing in between two other drawings. It just seems so bizarre. And it all makes perfect sense now. We were in-betweeners, learning how to do in-betweens.
Make the lines between the other lines.
Yeah, and do it beautifully, and do it so that the drawings...
So do you remember anybody that was in your group, your initial group?
I remember all of them.
Did they all stay in the business?
No. Most of them stayed. The names, Bob Ray.
Oh, yeah.
Rick Gonzalez.
Oh, yeah.
Stan Chen. Tom Dejanay. Tom Yakutis.
Yakutis. That's right.
Yakutis. Dave Mitchner. And Jack Foster. And myself. That's the crew.
And Dave told me about his early days. He was a manager at a gas station at the same time he was an in-betweener at Disney.
Oh, yeah, so he could earn a living.
Right. And then he told me, he said,
pay the bills.
He kept both jobs for quite a while because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to make it.
That's right. Yeah, if you work for Disney, you better have another job.
Because they didn't pay a whole lot of money.
Yeah, I remember a young woman who was told that they actually came right out and said, they were upfront about it. We don't pay much.
You're not the first person from that period.
Isn't that funny?
That has told me that.
Yeah.
That basically there have been a few others that said, Disney said to one person, "Oh, you have a wife and kids. You're not going to be able to work here."
Yeah, you're not gonna be able to make it on this salary. Yeah.
Well, they were honest, but it was hard not to be honest because it was obvious.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, we all had this the pixie dust thing. We were all just these Disney nuts.
Interested in working there.
Yeah, wanted to be a part of this crazy business.
So after the in-betweening training, what did they throw you into? What pool? What deep end of what deep pool did they throw you into?
Yeah. Well, once if you could survive the 30 days and qualify as a decent apprentice in-betweener, then you got a chance to work on production. Now you're a real Disney employee. And so the first thing that I got put on was the Mickey Mouse Club.
Oh, okay. And what did you work on there?
I was working for a very exuberant guy named Rolly Crump.
Oh, yeah.
Roland Crump was the assistant to animator Bob Carlson, and we were doing these Jiminy Crickets. You remember the Jiminy Cricket used to have these segments on the Mickey Mouse Club?
Oh, yeah.
And, singing about I'm No Fool or the Encyclopedia. And we had all of this, these really kind of cool, fully animated introductions. I mean, you think about this was for TV.
And Cliff was around a lot. And
Cliff Edwards was still around, still doing the voice of the cricket.
When I was a little kid, I met him in the commissary.
Yeah. A lot of these old guys, they were still the voices. the original voices were still around. Guys like Ducky Nash was still there doing Donald. And
so all the original voice guys
all the
were
original
still there.
Guys, Jim McDonald doing Mickey, and Cliff Edwards doing Jiminy Cricket. So it was a wild time.
So did you stay on the Mouse Club for a long time, or did you move over to the feature? Or
oh no, the feature was a long way away, because the feature, that was for the big shots. That was the big time. You don't even think about working on the feature.
So did you work on commercials then, probably?
Worked
too?
on a lot of stuff, shorts, TV stuff, Mickey Mouse Club stuff. I worked for so many animators, I can't even remember all the names. I mean, but they were all great guys.
And there was a big staff there.
Huge staff, yeah. A lot of names. Jerry Hathcock and Ed Solomon.
So was everybody,
so many.
I think the staff was around 11 or 1,200 at that time. They couldn't have all fit in the animation building, or did you get jammed into rooms?
You know, I think we did fit. Keep in mind that the animation building back in those days was completely filled with artists. Not managers and not accountants and not lawyers and not, all of the people that occupy offices today.
Walt was up on the third floor.
Yeah,
a few other
Walt
key
was on the
members
third
of
floor.
the team.
The story guys were on the third floor. Directors' units were on the second floor.
Background artists were on the second floor.
Right, yeah.
And the animators, I think, were all on the first floor, weren't they?
All of animation was on the first floor. Except once Sleeping Beauty began to sort of expand, we eventually outgrew the first floor, and some animation units moved up to the second floor.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, just because of the lack of space, because we filled up the entire first floor of the building. But as far as I know, we didn't have any other, satellite buildings. Everybody was in the big building, in the animation building.
There might have been a few over in the second floor of the ink and paint building. And
possibly, yeah, that's true.
Stuff over there, but they all would have been in those two main buildings.
The fact that we were still on the Disney lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody was.
Yeah.
So all right, so you're doing commercials, you're doing shorts, and how long did that whole period last? Because I know that after Sleeping Beauty, they somewhere in there they closed the shorts units and closed the commercial unit.
Oh yeah, that's
and then they axed a lot of people from even working on features, and they shrank down to a few hundred people from the 1,000 that they had.
Well, the reality of the animation business hit me one day. Keep in mind, I'm still this naive kid, just coming to the business. And I'm working away now. I was finally on the feature. This is like some 2 years later, and I'm finally working on Sleeping Beauty, working in Freddie Helmick's unit. And I remember these old guys, to me, they seemed old because they were a lot older than I was. Guys like Ray Aragon and Vic Halbush and Walt Perigoy, and they were all talking about, what are you going to do after the layoff?
And you went layoff?
I had no idea what are they talking about.
You were thinking this was the job for life.
I thought a job at Disney was like forever,
That's right.
And they're talking about the layoff, and I thought, what the heck?
And you hadn't even heard about it, right?
Hadn't even heard about it. Never even heard the word uttered. And, they're talking about, what are you going to do when the feature wraps up? When the crew gets laid off? Layoff. Yeah. So.
Did you start thinking about it at that point?
I sure did. It was like being hit with a cold glass of ice water.
Because that would have been 1958.
We're around 1958 now, and Sleeping Beauty in full production, headed toward the wrap up. So it was a rude awakening for this naive young kid.
Yeah.
That animation is not forever. It comes to an end. Many times it comes to an end.
So what did happen after you got the word from the wise old men?
Well, I think I was luckier than most. Sleeping Beauty finally wrapped up, and we were beginning to begin development on the next feature film, which was 101 Dalmatians. And of course, there's a whole story there all by itself, because Dalmatians was a major shift in animation at Disney. Xerox, yeah. And the fact that Roy had called Walt in and said, look, this picture costs
way too much money.
we can't afford to do this kind of thing anymore, and we're going to have to really cut back if we plan to stay in the animation business. It's just too darn expensive. And so one of the ways of saving money was, of course, layoffs, lay off half the staff. And
that'll cut costs.
That'll cut costs. And the other was of iWorks managing to get a photocopier to be expanded into the size of 2 rooms. And that became the Xerox process.
Oh, yeah.
Where drawings would now be photocopied onto sheets of acetate.
Gets rid of the inkers.
Gets rid of the inkers, and that'll cut costs. So Dalmatians was a major shift, not only with technology coming to Disney, but also with a new world of animation, where things would never be the same.
There was Paul Bunyan. Oh, there was Goliath Jr.
Yeah.
That was, I think, wasn't that the first... it was either Paul Bunyan. I know Goliath Jr. was the first experiment with xerography.
Yeah, we had experimented, even on some TV stuff. We had used the Xerox process on some television segments before going to the feature film Dalmatians.
Yeah.
Yeah, but...
so they had a little experiment, because I know... I mean, the interesting thing for me is that they had 2 schools of thought on xerography.
Right.
Because Dalmatians are a lot of the animators' drawings, and it's fairly, construction lines are popping on and off.
Right.
But it works pretty well. But then I know within a decade and a half they were still using Xerox, but they wanted everything real clean, so that it looked more like an ink line, and they used brown Xerox or gray Xerox or. So
that whole thing, it's interesting. We started out with this very loose and rough pencil line stuff and the animators were delighted because they thought, wow, for the first time
our drawings are on the screen.
Our drawings are finally on the screen, and guys like Milt Kahl just truly loved it because he would say things like, oh, leave in the construction lines and don't clean the stuff up too tight, and especially when I was working on Sword in the Stone, which was our next picture when I actually worked for Kahl. And we started doing what they called touch-up, where the animators purposely did not want the scenes tightly cleaned up. Keep it loose, keep everything. We want to see the drawing. We want to feel the drawing.
Right.
And so
I think that worked pretty well.
It did.
I think especially because you design the environment in the background so that it works with that style of drawing for the characters. I thought that they had a lot of vitality and charm. Those pictures.
It did. And I thought that the production design of 101 Dalmatians was just terrific stuff. I thought what Ken Anderson, Tom Orb, and Walt Paragoy did, pulling all of these elements together. Just gorgeous. A great looking film.
Yeah.
Now, however, big however here, Walt hated it.
Yeah, no, I'd heard that. I know that Ken Anderson, when I worked
with him,
he didn't
like it at all.
Walt hated the way he arted, and yet that's, I think, one of their most enduring pictures from that.
Yeah, I know.
He liked the older style.
A beautiful film, I thought, just a real breakthrough in many ways, and Disney just could not stand it.
Really?
Now, eventually he warmed up to it. But boy, poor Ken, he suffered for that one.
Yeah, no, even 15 years later when I worked for him, he was telling me about how Walt beat him about the shoulders and head. Over the way it looked.
Yeah.
And all that. And how he had a nervous breakdown.
After doing this marvelous job to find out that the boss hates it. It just.
Yeah,
you can't win, sometimes.
Yeah, but I think. I thought that worked well there, and it certainly worked well on Sword in the Stone. But then they started, then over time they began sort of evolving away from that particular look.
Yeah, well, we started trying different things with the Xerox process, and on Mary Poppins we were going to use this sort of grayish Xerox line to make the line less obtrusive, and we experimented with that and tried some other things.
Now, did they use that in the picture?
I don't think they did at all. Yeah, I don't think they did. I remember seeing experiments with it, and I remember up in Ham's unit going up and looking at
Ham Lusk,
looking at the boards on the wall and some of what they were experimenting with the art direction. But eventually, we just went back to what they basically call the Disney house style.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
moving back to 56, 57. 58, before the big layoff. What was the atmosphere of the studio like? Because they had the ball field.
Oh, yeah.
They had the ping pong tables. They had all of this stuff going on.
Yeah.
And what was the atmosphere like then to after Walt's death and then on even later under Eisner and Katzenberg?
Right. Well, arriving at Disney in 1956, imagine coming to the Walt Disney Studio as a young kid, and it was just, it was Wonderland. As a matter of fact, I think I referred to it as that in my book, that it was like Alice entering Wonderland. I mean, for a young kid, for a young artist coming to Disney, it was like this was Mecca, you know. It was just this amazing place filled with artists. Not filled with managers and lawyers and accountants and all the people who are at Disney today.
Well,
but it was filled with artists.
Wasn't
designers.
a conglomerate then? It was
No, exactly, yeah.
A cartoon studio with pretension.
Yeah. It was an artist community.
Yeah.
And everywhere you went, you saw artists. Every wing you went into, you saw painters and designers. You go upstairs and you see more artists. You go up to the third floor, more artists. Everywhere you went, you saw artists. The Disney studio was all about art. And you thought, my God, I'm in heaven.
And then there's, what struck me as a little kid was they had these ball fields, and people were playing games out in the ball fields. And
exactly.
They had this commissary where people were paying very little money to get their food.
Right. It was more a college campus than a movie studio. Though it was a studio, it had sound stages, it had equipment and all of this stuff. But it was green lawns with squirrels scampering about the lawns. A softball field, a volleyball court, guys out pitching horseshoes, commissary where you could have lunch for $1 and come back with change in your pocket.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was a different era.
Yeah, different era. It was another world. It was another world entirely, and to be there during that time, that old joke about Ward Kimball when he saw the young kids coming into Disney. I think this was in the 70s. Supposedly, Ward said this. Who knows if it's true or not?
No,
but Ward sees these kids and he says, "Hey, Walt's dead and you missed it."
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's what it was like. I mean, back if you missed that period,
then you missed it.
You missed it.
Too bad. Move on.
Move on, because it ain't gonna ever happen again.
Now, my other question is, okay, so how did you make the big transition? Because they laid off 75% of staff when Sleeping Beauty came to an end, but you were among the hardy survivors, were you not?
Saved by the United States Army.
Oh, really?
I was drafted.
Oh,
after the completion,
I didn't know that.
After the completion of Sleeping Beauty,
you got your draft notice?
I received the letter in the mail, and it actually did say greetings. I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe that was a joke, but it doesn't really say greetings, does it? Yes, it does. Greetings. Your service has been requested for the United States military.
So you never got a layoff.
I never got laid off.
You showed them your draft notice.
I got a government job instead.
So seriously.
And the funny thing is it's when I arrived back at Disney some 2 years later, a lot of the old timers thought I'd been on vacation.
Really?
Yeah. See, at Disney, time is different at Disney.
Yeah, right.
What seemed like, what was 2 years to me, seemed like 2 weeks to them.
Yeah, or it might have seemed like 5 years to you, because I was in the service too for a few years.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I know how that can go. So you came back then in what, 1960?
1960, exactly. Yeah, back at Disney in 1960.
So you return, and they bring you back because, of course, under law, they had to take you back.
They had to, yeah.
So you come back, and where do you pick up from where you left off? What are you working on?
I pick up on the end of 101 Dalmatians.
Which was just starting when you left.
Which was starting when I left and was just wrapping up when I arrived back at Disney.
So you did assistant work on 101.
Yeah.
Do you remember who you were working for at the time? Were you working for Milt or were you working for Stan?
I definitely know I wasn't working for Milt at the time, and I can't even remember who I was. I do remember that I shared an office with Bernie Mattinson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he was down there in the assistant ranks for a long time.
We were over in A-Wing. And so when I moved back in after my stint in the military, I moved into an office with. Back in those days, I usually had 2 guys to an office. That's how it worked out.
Yeah.
I shared an office with Bernie, and we wrapped up Dalmatians, And then it was after Dalmatians that I went back to work with Stan Green and Milt Kahl.
Oh, okay. So did you swing over to the next picture right after Dalmatians wrapped up? I mean,
a little bit. We had it took a while before Sword in the Stone was just ramping up after Dalmatians, so we did some shorts in between, and I worked on some short animated things. And they always had enough work to keep you busy. You know, if they didn't have a feature going on, they usually had some TV work or short stuff to keep you going.
And how was Milt to work for, and how was Stan to work for at that period of time?
Well, Stan was great because I had worked for Stan, a lot earlier on Sleeping Beauty, so I knew Stan already from.
And you knew his working methods.
Oh yeah. What I didn't know was I didn't know Kahl. Because when I worked on Sleeping Beauty, I never even saw Milt Kahl. At that time, Milt Kahl was just this loud voice.
You were further down the ranks.
Well, I was further down, and back in those days, you didn't even, you seldom even met or even saw the animator, especially a big shot like Milt Kahl. So I would hear Milt's voice back when I was working for Stan. I never even saw the man. I just hear his voice, in the next room. With his usual
screaming and yelling.
You guys can't draw their ass. And it's like, oh, gee, it was to a young kid, it was scary. So then when I finally find out I'm going to be working for Milt Kahl again,
yeah,
I'm terrified. Like, oh no, not Milt Kahl again. But
and how was he to work for?
It turns out he was great. He was great, and we got along just fine. So my fears were unfounded.
He didn't strenuously object to your pencil style.
He did not. I was right in the groove. I guess I lucked out. So and it was one of the few pictures where I worked on from almost start to finish. When the earliest scenes of Sword in the Stone, all the way to the point where Wart pulls the sword out of the stone. At the very end, that was Milt's scene when Wart grabs the sword and pulls it.
What were the characters that Milt did? I thought he did. Did he do Mim?
Oh, he did. He did do Mim. He did the Kid. He did Merlin. He did a lot of the characters. He did Sir Kay and Sir Ector.
But in those days, you weren't the directing animators weren't necessarily assigned to a lead character, and that's what they stuck with through the whole thing.
I think Milt got what he wanted.
So whatever scene that he wanted.
I think a guy like Milt Kahl, he got the stuff he wanted to animate.
So he didn't stick with one character.
No. I mean, he did a lot of Merlin, and he did the Kid. He did, and of course he did Mim, which he did Madame Mim, just beautiful stuff. I still look back on that.
The Wizard's Duel and all that.
The Wizard's Duel, just really cool stuff. And but he was great to work for. I had no problems with Kahl. I think I found my secret weapon for Milt Kahl. I made him laugh.
What would you tell him?
I didn't tell him jokes. I did gags.
Oh, really? Oh, you drew gags?
I drew gags, yeah. So
what did you put him on his desk?
I put him on my door. I had the hallway of D-Wing. I would put the gags on the door, on the wall.
And he'd walk by and laugh.
And Kahl would stomp in the morning because he didn't walk in. He stomped in. You hear the door slam, stomp, stomp, stomp. And then Milt's coming in, Milt is coming down the hallway. And then he'd stop and look at the gags on my wall, and if you saw one that, he particularly liked, he had this huge laugh, and he would just roar with laughter. That's blankety blank funny,
And then he'd go into his door.
And then he would stomp down the hallway into his office.
Slam the door.
Slam the door, yeah. But he thought I was funny, so that kept me safe.
So when you got to the end of Sword in the Stone, I know the big transition for you was Jungle Book, but did you start out, were you still working for Milt as an assistant on Jungle Book at the beginning? How did the big transition take place?
No, I purposely avoided Jungle Book. I was going through what I called my feature film burnout. I was just tired of working on feature films, and I wanted to do something different. So I wanted to work on anything but a Disney feature. And so luckily I had worked on a bunch of things, one of which was some short stuff with Ward Kimball.
Yeah.
Ward was animating, I think the duck, Ludwig von Drake. And just, I don't even know what these cartoons were. It might have It might have been animated shorts or it might have been TV stuff. But it was an opportunity to work with Ward because he's always been one of my favorite animators. And Fred Kopetz had been assisting Kimball. And I don't know what happened with Fred. Maybe he left the studio or got another assignment. But there was an opening for somebody to assist Kimball. And I thought, wow, I'm going for that, to work with Ward Kimball. And the funny part was, with working for Kimball, I never saw Ward that much because he seemed like he was always asleep on his sofa.
Really?
Yeah.
Now,
He still had his office up on the second floor.
Kimball told me something about when he was animating Ludwig von Drake. He said he animated the character really small and cranked a lot of footage.
Yeah.
Because it was television. I just watched it.
Oh yeah.
And he would whiz through it.
Oh yeah.
Lickety split.
Yeah.
Was that true?
It was. He was an animation machine. Ward was such a good animator, and I think Ward was just a guy who's a natural animator. So this stuff was just flowed out of him, effortlessly. And so Ward would come in and just in the morning and just knock out a ton of footage, and then crawl on his couch and go to sleep.
Really?
Yeah.
He'd sleep in the afternoon?
Sleep in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, because he told me he was cranking a lot of footage for that, and he said he cranked a lot of footage for Dumbo.
Oh, yeah.
Doing 35 feet a week, and I think he said he was doing something around that or more.
Oh, yeah.
The Von Drakes.
Yeah, the Von Drakes, he was really plowing through that stuff like crazy. But for me, it was an opportunity to have Kimball's drawings and study his animation and learn from him, even though Ward wasn't like over my shoulder teaching me how to draw. The fact that I had his scenes and I could, roll the stuff and see what he was doing and how he was doing it. He didn't put a lot on paper, there wasn't a whole lot there. It was like an oval for a head.
I looked at Ollie Johnson's stuff once on The Fox and the Hound, and he had all the information that you needed was there, but there wasn't a lot of drawing for some of the,
Exactly.
some of the drawing didn't have a lot of
mileage
in them.
Yeah, exactly.
So Ward was like that?
Ward was like that, very much like that. I don't know if Ward always worked that way, but he certainly did on Von Drake. I mean, he had his charts and he had indications, stuff he wanted to happen, overlap, follow through, this stuff, but just, almost scribbles. But if you knew animation, you knew what to do with it. He really left the drawing to you because Ward wasn't about drawing. He was just knocking out, these animated scenes, and he wasn't spending a lot of time drawing this stuff. He would just bat this stuff out, mile a minute. Amazing.
Yeah, that's what he told me.
Yeah,
and he said
truly amazing.
He animated it really small so that there was less pencil mileage. And
He never mentioned that to me about animating small, but that's a fun.
Well, I don't know. You had the drawings.
Yeah,
I don't know what size.
I never thought of them as being small, but I guess if Ward thought they were small, perhaps they were. But everything was there.
Yeah.
It was all there.
Yeah. So from Ludwig von Drake, what did you move on to at Disney after that?
Well, this is where my life changes. I'm having a ball working on Kimball stuff and just having a grand old time. And still, I hadn't given up my dream of one day becoming a Disney animator.
Right.
So I'm still looking forward to that. Friday afternoon, I get a call from my boss, Andy Ingman.
Yeah.
And he says, pack up your stuff and move upstairs. You're going to be moving up to the story department. And
did you ever figure out how they happened to tap you on the shoulder?
I have some ideas. I don't have any proof, but I have some ideas.
What are those ideas?
Back in the 60s, I was drawing cartoons. I just really got into drawing gags, and I was drawing gags all the time. It kept me...
And putting them up on your door.
Putting them up on my door, and then people would take them off my door, and they would make photocopies, and they would put them in their office. So before I knew it, my gags were all over the studio, just all over the place. Every office you'd go in, you'd see one of my gags.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, gee, is this going to get me in trouble? Well, apparently, with my gags all over the Disney studio, apparently somebody saw them. I suspect maybe Walt Disney might have seen them.
Yeah.
And so
the same way you saw Rolly Crump
and
his mobiles.
The same way he saw Rolly's stuff, because Walt, wandered the hallways. Anyway, and so that's my guess on how this. All I know was Andy says, "Come in."
It wasn't Andy England's idea.
No, it wasn't, not at all.
He was the messenger.
Andy was just a messenger. He was just following orders.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Pack up your stuff. You're moving upstairs to Story." And I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not a Story guy. I don't know anything about Story." And the way he put it, I realized, because he was so, it wasn't like a request or an offer. Or,
this is what you're doing.
Or an opportunity. It was like, this is what you're doing. Like no questions asked. Don't give me any. Just do it. And so I figured.
Did you give him a lot of argument?
No, I didn't. I realized, because he was so adamant, this word had to come from on high. That somebody important must have said this, because just the way Andy put it, like, don't argue, don't ask, just pack up your stuff and move upstairs. And
so you moved up to the second floor. What wing were you in?
2C.
2C.
2C. Wooley's wing. Wooley's wing. And so I knew when Andy told me it would be 2C, I knew what was going on up there, and that was the Jungle Book.
And you tell me earlier you were in a room with Vance
Gary. Yeah, I moved into the large story room with Vance Gary, and once Andy said 2C, I knew what I was in for. I knew that meant that was going to be Wooley's unit, and I knew that at the time Wooley was doing the Jungle Book. I'd already known. I'd heard the big fallout from the big Walt Disney Bill Peet fight, that Bill had walked off the movie.
And how long before you moved up there had that happened? A few months?
No, just
a week?
About a week.
Really?
About a week. So I already knew what I was in for. I thought, oh no, Bill Peet's walked off the movie.
And Pete had been there since the 30s.
He'd been there since the 1930s. Isn't that amazing? I guess finally he'd had it. He and Walt had it out, and he said, "I'm out of here," and he was done with Disney.
Yeah, no, I read his autobiography.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. It's kind of sad in a way, for such a long relationship.
Yeah, because I guess they were pretty close.
Yeah, that these two guys, and the fact that Bill was like Walt's favorite story guy too. But things change.
Yeah. So Pete exits, and you enter.
And I enter.
And you're there with Vance.
And up there with Vance, who's Vance, of course, is the most mellow guy in the world.
Yeah.
And Vance is sitting up in his office reading a newspaper, which is what Vance usually did. He seemed like he was always sitting back reading a newspaper.
Yeah, but he turned out more work.
He's one of these guys, you never see him work, but he cranks out a ton of work somehow.
Ed Gombert told me that, when he was in a room with Vance, he said Vance came in and worked one day a week. He said, Vance does more work in the day that he's there than we do all week.
That's very true.
And when you'd walk into his office, Vance would go, "Hey, sit down.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, what's going on? Yeah, I know. It was the same kind of thing. And so here I am. I'm up in the story department, extremely nervous and like, why am I here? What am I doing here? I don't know.
You're right next to Wolfgang.
Yeah, right next to Wooly, who's only a few steps away, and like, oh my, it was very uncomfortable initially. And,
so what was your first assignment on the Jungle Book? Do you remember?
Vaguely. It had something to do with the kid and Baloo the bear. And all this stuff is kind of like a blur now, because I just remember.
So long ago.
And Larry Clemens would come in with typewritten pages. Larry would write an outline.
But he wouldn't do dialogue necessarily, right? He'd just do an outline? Or
he would come in later. After the boards were done, Larry would come in for what he called a dialogue polish.
Oh, okay.
So he would take our rough dialogue and clean it up.
Okay.
And that was Larry's dialogue.
So he would hand you an outline with beats on it, and then you would put it up as a board.
Just go for it, yeah. Just start boarding. I mean, I'd get pages from Larry, and Vance and I would just start billing the board. Just start drawing and putting pictures on the board. Basically, I was just doing what I saw the old Disney story guys do. I said, well, that's how the old guys did it. I guess I'll do it just like them.
So were you jointly doing boards with Vance? You'd put up a drawing, he'd put up a drawing.
Yeah. It was just very collaborative. And the fact that, the way they had I think all story guys probably did this. They had, the desk would face each other.
Right. So you had the two big assistant director desks.
Yeah.
With lots of drawers
Yeah,
and shelves.
yeah. And we'd talk back and forth. What if the bear did this? Yeah. What if the kid did that? And what if the tiger comes in and what? You just talk back and forth,
And draw it up.
it was very organic and very loose and very fun, and we just draw it up and eventually build a board. So I remember one day we'd gotten the board up, a couple of boards, I guess, and we'd had them because we had those were large story rooms.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
So the wall you could stack two boards, top and bottom. So big.
Hang them
story
from
rooms.
those things.
Yeah,
those
yeah.
Tracks.
So Vance and I had put up a couple of boards we thought was, seemed to be working okay. And then Wooly comes in, totally unannounced, because he didn't have to announce himself. he's the film's director.
He was doing that 15 or 16 years later
Yeah.
when I got there. He would walk in and go,
just-
let's see what you got.
Yeah, see what you got. That was pretty much it. Yeah, with the cigar. Let's see what you got. So he'd come in, he'd look at the boards, and of course I'm terrified because I'm going to be getting all these changes and notes and revisions from Wooly.
Yeah.
And he just stands there and he looks at the board for like, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes. And then he walks out. That's it. He said, okay, whatever. He just,
But it had no.
he had nothing to say. He just said, show it to Walt.
Now that had changed.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
different because there was somebody else higher up the food chain that did the.
Yeah.
But when I was there, it was basically he'd come in, look at the board, sit down. Suddenly there'd be a meeting, which would be unannounced.
Yeah.
And he'd start pinning corners of drawings over and throwing things. But there was none of that in 1963, huh?
No. I do
Or
recall,
64.
I do recall the tearing the sketches off the storyboard, though.
Oh, really?
I do recall that. Yeah, I always thought it was so funny that, and when I came back to Disney years later, when everybody was so gentle about removing story sketches like they were somehow precious little icons, they were very precious about they pinned the board back or whatever. And I remember Wooly would just come in and rip stuff off the board. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that.
But he wasn't doing that with your first pass.
No. He was gonna leave that for Walt.
Okay, so he comes in, looks at the boards, exits,
yeah.
and you've been up there for all of probably 3 or 4 weeks at that point.
Yeah. Still very green. Still not knowing the routine. Still not really knowing what the heck I'm doing, except that I'm in all these meetings with these old men. That's how I felt. I felt like this kid.
Well, you were
with all these old guys. I said, why am I here with all these old men?
I mean, even Vance, who was probably young, he was probably still 7 or 8 years older than you.
Vance was a young guy too. So here we were with all these old codgers, and we would have these story meetings, and it seemed like they talked about everything but the story.
Yeah.
We're going to have a meeting. We're going to have a meeting on the story. So we'd go in and then Larry would start telling stories about when he worked with Bing Crosby.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Yeah, they told these stories. Like, when do we talk about the story? And then Frank Thomas would come up, and he would come up with a story suggestion, and then Frank would leave, and then the story guys would say, those darn animators are always trying to horn in on our,
So how much between Wooly coming in and silently going through it, exiting, and then Walt coming down and holding a meeting?
Eventually, Wooly's secretary, gosh, what was her name?
Arlene? Was it Arlene at that point?
Or was it Betty Gosson?
Might have been at that time.
Yeah.
But when I was there, it was Arlene.
Arlene, okay. I seem to recall a Betty Gosson. But anyway, we'd schedule a meeting. Or they would try to get a meeting set up with Walt. And that was pretty much when Walt was available.
Right.
And, of course, nobody knew when that would be. So that was
now, would you keep boarding in the interim, doing more stuff and more stuff? Because you couldn't just sit there and wait.
There was a lot of sitting there and waiting, which is what really baffled me because I was concerned about this. I would tell Vance, well, since we're waiting for this meeting with Walt, shouldn't we be developing some other stuff or doing other, and he said, no, you just wait until Walt sees the boards. Yeah, but shouldn't we be doing something? We're on the payroll. Shouldn't we be drawing and developing and creating? No, you wait till Walt sees it. So that really kind of freaked me out because I figured, I'm getting paid to do nothing. And I want to do something, but no, you wait until Walt sees the board and then tells you.
Well, actually, there was a version of that with Woolley.
Yeah.
It was like, and some of the same player. It was Dave Mitchell was up. Dave was in one room and Vance was in another.
Right.
And Dave would have a Woolley meeting.
Yeah.
And Walt's gone by this time, and Woolley would completely destroy the board.
Yeah.
And then Dave would redraw the board, and within about 3 days would have another meeting.
Yeah.
And Vance said to me, "I don't know how he does that." I said, I can't take that. I can't have the board destroyed and then 3 days later have another meeting and have the board destroyed he said, "I've always got to spend about a week and a half to 2 weeks before I have the next meeting. I can't take it otherwise."
That's funny.
So
that's very true. Yeah, I know.
He could never understand why Dave would work so hard and fast to get the next meeting where his boards would be destroyed yet again.
Yeah, exactly. How much pain do you need?
But in such a short
time, yeah.
He wanted. I mean, Vance's theory was always, at least to me, was I want to space the pain out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not.
Vance was a great mentor for me because he really kind of set me straight about how this whole Disney thing works,
Yeah, he did me too.
And kind of like, just take it easy, don't worry about it, and when Walt comes in, he'll tell us what he wants,
So, how much waiting was there before Walt finally did materialize? And what was that first meeting like?
It could be a week or it could be 2 weeks, and Walt Disney would always arrive. Without an entourage. That's the big thing that's I noticed changed over the years. Walt would come in by himself, and he would just you'd hear him stomping down the hallway, and you hear the cough, the famous signature Disney cough.
Yeah.
Which meant that Walt was in the area, and he would just walk in the story room, and chairs were already set up, and plop down in front, and then said, "Okay, what you got?" What do you have to show me? And
then Vance would pop up.
And Vance would,
with a pointer.
Yeah, and Vance would do his extremely low-key pitch, because with Vance there were no frills, no performance. Vance was extremely low-key. Just this is what happens. Tells the story. Walt, goes right through it, and then Walt would just say whether he liked it or not. And he was very concise, He either liked it or he didn't like it.
Now, would he go back after the pitch? Would he go back through the board and go through what he liked and what he didn't like?
Sometimes. Not always. And if he seemed happy with it, he would just say, great, and continue on. He seemed to like the way the film was going, and that was the thing that really baffled me. Once again, as a young, naive storyteller. I couldn't figure out why Walt seemed to like this movie so much, because I thought it was pretty darn awful at the time.
Really?
Yeah, we were like, man, he likes it. This is everything seems so lame to us. I don't know why, but it didn't seem like it was anything that great. I thought, the stuff Bill Pete was doing was so much cooler. And we're doing all of this kind of lame stuff.
And basically you threw out all the stuff that Pete had been doing previously, which was part of the blow-up because Walt didn't like it.
Walt didn't like it. And so here we are doing all of this stuff, and I just felt like, gee, and he likes this, It was that kind of thing. Like you hear the story master has been rejected, and his stuff has been tossed in the dumpster. And now Disney is liking the stuff we're doing. It's like it's bizarro world. Wait a minute. He likes our stuff, and he doesn't like the master's stuff.
Well, they had two different visions. I guess that was pretty much it.
So it was just a really weird experience to. But then again, I had never been in meetings with Walt before, so this was the first time for me. So I didn't really know.
Did Vance do any post-mortems with you? Tell you this went well, or this didn't go well?
Yeah, and so much. Vance was just so low key. If some things went well, he would just sort of smile and say, I guess it went okay. There's no exuberance, no celebration, no jumping up and down. He would just say, yeah, that's good.
It went all right.
Went all right. I guess he liked it. Whatever. We just continue on. So it kind of went that way through the movie, and I look back on this film as one of the more bizarre films I've ever worked on, where the fact is, I look back on it as I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
And yet the old man seems to like it.
Yeah.
So, I'm baffled. Like, what? What am I doing that's working? I can't.
You couldn't figure it out.
I couldn't figure it out.
Of reference.
I had, this is my first job in story. Walt Disney likes it, and I don't even know why he likes it. So it was very strange. It was a very strange experience. But
so you'd have a meeting with him about once every 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, that was about the way it would shake. About every 2 or 3 weeks.
And you'd move through it pretty quickly then.
Yeah, and the stuff. I remember. I think what really stands out in my mind, something he didn't like, was the Rocky the Rhino sequence.
Which isn't even in the picture.
Which is not even in the picture, and the character was totally eliminated from the film.
What was his reaction to that? This isn't working?
Totally hated it. Not that it wasn't just working, that he just couldn't stand it.
Really?
He just could not stand that. But somehow the guys had convinced Walt to allow them to put it up on reels, because they had pitched the board to Walt. He didn't like the storyboards, but he allowed them to take it to reels, and to add the voice of Frankie Fontaine, who was doing the Rhino's voice,
who did a lot of the drunk in the bar for Jackie Gleason.
for Jackie Gleason, Crazy Guggenheim, Yeah,
and it was the same voice and all that.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And so Walt just could not stand that, and he said, "No, that's gone, dead, hate it, kill it, get rid of it."
So did you have to insert something else in there where Frank's bit?
Yeah, well, I didn't have to work, because we had a couple of teams of guys working in tandem, and Vance and I were doing things, and there were another couple of guys across the hallway doing other sequences. I think it was Dick Lucas and Eric Cleworth. I'm not,
And you said Al Wilson.
Al Wilson was on the film for a while, but then Al went back to Santa Barbara. I mean, Al would just vanish on occasion. I don't know what the deal was with Al. Al would work on the film for a while, and then boom, he's gone, until he shows up again.
So he was there and he wasn't.
So
there
he was there.
Yeah.
But
you and Vance were on it all.
So
the way through.
It was me and Vance, and then I think Eric and Dick Lucas, and I think it's a very small crew. I mean, it wasn't a big story crew. It was really quite small.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing, and you moved fairly rapidly through the whole thing.
And we moved quickly. Yeah. Well, even the animation staff was small. There weren't that many animators. Maybe 4 people in layout. It was a very tight crew. And maybe that's why the film moved so quickly, because we weren't, dragging around this enormous weight, because some productions grow so huge today.
Yeah. Well,
I know with these
30 story guys
these
on
CG films are just like, the credits run for 10 minutes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'm thinking, do you really need that many people on a film?
Well, and Jungle Book and Dalmatians are the 2 iconic Disney animated features from the 60s.
Right.
I mean, there were others, but those are the ones that are remembered.
And both with very small animation crews.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing. But yeah, it was quite a time. It was.
So how many sequences do you think you worked on the Jungle Book? Half of them? All of them? Passing through all of them?
Yeah, I don't know. I look back on and remember the stuff I didn't work on. That's how I know. I didn't work on. People always ask me about the King Louis sequence, which is a sequence I love. It's very funny.
But you didn't work.
But I didn't work on it. I know that Al did. Al Wilson, and I think Vance did, and all of that stuff with the monkeys, and very, very funny stuff. And I didn't work on the ending. I didn't work on that. But I thought it's really funny. I thought it was kind of bizarre, because we were doing this Beatles thing.
Right.
And we had our
barbershop.
Yeah. We had our office filled with Beatles albums, because we were going to do these vultures as the Fab Four, and they were all talking with.
Well, they still do talk
Liverpool
with
accents,
right?
who's that funny little boy? You know, I don't know who he is. But Walt felt that the Beatles were a flash in the pan.
Well, he was wrong. That was one thing he was wrong about.
And those Beatles won't be around very long, and so he opted to go with Barbershop Quartet. But I thought it was so bizarre that even though we went with the Barbershop Quartet, they still had these Liverpool accents, and like, what, you know? So there were a lot of things about the film where I just.
In 2020 hindsight, they should have gone with the Beatles.
Yeah, well, that too, yeah, but it's a very, very strange little film, and yet it really holds together.
Well, it was a huge hit.
And was a huge hit. Audiences like it. Kids have come up and told me that the reason I got into animation is because I saw the Jungle Book when I was a kid, and I was so. Andreas Deja told me that he was influenced heavily by the Jungle Book. And people tell me about the great work I've done on the film, and I look back on it and like, what? You know, what great work? What?
I don't. What?
I don't
what
recall.
Are you talking about?
I don't recall doing anything great on the Jungle Book, but.
Well, we spent a lot of time on that one picture,
yeah.
So we should probably. So after you're done with the Jungle Book, and the picture hits and is a big. And now you left Disney.
I left. Yeah, I left to start my own company. Vignette Films Incorporated.
And how long were you doing that for?
Oh, probably too long. We wanted to go out and make films.
And this was 67, 68?
This was, end of 66, 67. And I don't know, it was just an opportunity to go out and try
You're
something.
still a young guy.
I was still young then. And a lot of guys had gone out, started their own companies. Vic Habush started his company.
Rudy Cataldi had one for a while.
Herbie Stott and Frank Terry started the Spun Buggy Works. And there were a lot of these little commercial houses around town, you know, guys who had bailed out of Disney or out of other studios. And we're doing animation and doing TV commercials, and it just seemed like a very exciting time. And so, yeah, you could sit at Disney and pull down a paycheck, have a steady job. But we were young, and we thought, well, why not try something new, you know? I mean, all you can do is fail.
Yeah.
And if you fail, you just, you know,
go back to the studio.
Go back to the studio, yeah. So it was really a great experience, and I don't regret leaving one bit.